Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff, and also welcome to part 6 of our Endeavour build by Amati. So we are on figure 5 today, so let's just have a read through what the instructions are telling us to do, and then we can talk about how we're going to tackle that. So figure 5, mask the wood deck, then apply to the hull at least one pair of layers of Tamiya grey surface primer. Let it dry completely. Eliminate from the hull eventual painting flaws using fine grained sandpaper. Then we have a part 2, which says draw on the hull the lines that limit the white band that matches the waterline, using as a reference the measure present on the plan in 1:1 scale. Mask with a soft tape that lines determined the paint in flat white, the space between them, to obtain the white band. So I think we're starting to paint the hull now, so I think it's worth going ahead and just reading what figure 6 is asking us to do, and then we can talk about the whole painting process. So in figure 6, it says apply several layers of colour until the white covers perfectly the grey tone of the putty. Let the paint dry completely between one layer and the next. When the last paint layer is perfectly dry, remove the mask. Now proceed to mask the white band with the adhesive tape, making it adhere uniformly to the hull. Paint the hull with flat dark blue, colour 5002, reference Tamiya AS8. Apply several layers, letting the paint dry completely between one layer and the next. Once the whole paint job is completely dry, apply a transparent finish using Tamiya TS13 Clear. Right, so what the instructions have done over 2 steps is explain to us how they would like us to paint the hull and in what colours. Now they're referencing Tamiya, but obviously you don't have to use Tamiya, and in fact I won't be. And they're also referencing paint from a rattle can system, so that gives you 1 or 2 problems. So let's talk about how we need to tackle this with different paint systems, and then I want to do this slightly different to the instructions, and I'm going to walk you through what the instructions are asking you to do, what I'm going to do differently, and why. So what the instructions are asking us to do is mask off the deck so we don't get any paint on it, and that's great, and that will be our first step. Then they want us to prime the hull in grey. So again, that's perfectly fine. The reason why they're asking us to use grey is grey will show up any particular issues you've got in the surface better than other colours. Well, in fact, the best colour to do it in is actually a metallic colour, because metallics bounce the light off, and so you see even better any issues, but they are difficult to paint over, so generally a flat grey. So rather than using a rattle can, you can use any grey primer, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So then what it wants you to do is it wants you to mark out with a pencil the position of the white line, and then it wants you to get some tape. When it says soft tape, it's referring to modelling yellow tape, often referred to as Kamoi tape, Kamoi. So you can go and search for that. Tamiya masking tape is the same tape, and there are other brands on the market as well. Then it wants us to put a second line underneath so that we've marked out our white line. It then wants us to paint the white paint with a sufficient number of layers that we don't see the grey. So obviously, because we've primed in grey, what will happen is you'll have a dark subsurface. So the white will appear dark, and if you've put it on uneven, it might look patchy. So you'll need several coats to even up the saturation of the paint and make sure that you can't see any unevenness from the grey. Then when you've done that, it wants us to then remove those two pieces of tape and mask off the white line, like so, which I just made it look really easy, and I was hoping I wouldn't. That's really tricky to do. That is really tricky to do, because what you've done is you've put a perfect white line down, and then you've got to mask that perfect white line down. And when you're putting tape over it, you can't easily see where the top and bottom of the line is. So it's very, very difficult to do that. And actually, I recommend that's not the way to do it. Then when you've done that, it wants you to paint blue, and again, several layers to build up the saturation of the pigment, so you've not got a translucent blue. And again, it's asking you to use a rattle can, and they're referencing a particular brand and colour. Now, the issue with using a rattle can is you need a very easy to ventilate space, like a garage with the garage door open, for example. You also need to have a good paint respirator, and that's not necessarily equipment that everyone's got. Personally, I find painting with a rattle can more difficult because you can put too much paint on and get runs, and you can put too little paint on. It tends to be patchy. It's a skill that you have to learn, painting with a rattle can. And whilst it's quick, it can also be more expensive, because you've got to put several layers down. You might use all the paint. It's unlikely you would on the white, but it's possible that you could on the blue, depending on whether you find that you've got to rub down the blue surface and get rid of any imperfections that you've created in the painting process and go back over it. So yeah, it poses some problems. So how else could you paint it if you're not going to use a rattle can? Well, you could go in and paint it with a brush, in which case you want a nice big flat brush to be able to do that. And we'll talk you through that process a little bit later. But that means putting down potentially several coats of colour and doing it in a particular way so that you don't see brush strokes and you get a nice even finish. Or you could use an airbrush and put the paint down using an airbrush. So that means using either enamel or acrylic paints that you put through an airbrush and paint it on. Now, all of that will depend on your level of modelling experience, your experience using rattle cans, your preference, your equipment. But I'm building this in a beginner's, as a sort of a beginner's build for people who are doing this for the first time. So I'm going to assume that this might be the first model you've ever built, in which case you're unlikely to have a relatively expensive item of equipment like an airbrush, and these cost more than this kit. So although you can get much cheaper ones for beginners when you're starting out, but they also take quite a bit of practice to get used to, and that means you're not going to be able to buy one of these and just start putting paint down. So we're going to rule out the airbrush. I've already ruled out the using a rattle can, because I actually work from a room inside the house that other people need access to. So having all the fumes from a rattle can is not something that's an option for me. So that leaves me with painting with a brush, and I think for most beginners that would be the start point. So we're going to do it that way. We're gonna paint with a brush and show you how to do that and how to achieve a good finish. Now, the paint process is fairly similar to what has been described in the instructions. However, as I've already said, the masking process they've described, I think, is going to cause some problems and is quite tricky to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to prime, and then when we've primed, we're going to paint the white down without any masking, which means rather than painting a controlled short area just where we want the paint, we're going to paint a wider area to ensure that we've covered the area where the white stripe could go. So we won't mark it out, we will just paint a broad white band, which allows us then to put the let that dry, and then we can mask off our white line, and we only have to mask off once, and then I'll talk to you about how we seal that off and what have you. So figure 5 is asking us to prime and then mark up and tape up the hull ready for paint, and then in figure 6 it's going to ask us to paint. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to talk to you about masking off the deck. We're going to do it in a little bit more detail than the instructions, because we want to do some particular things like painting this edge here, so we need to make sure that we haven't masked that off, and then we're going to prime the hull, and then we will mark off, we will paint the white band ready for masking, which we'll do in the next video. So in this video we will mask off, we will prime, we will look at solving any imperfections, reprime if we need to, and we'll paint the white band. So that's quite a lot of work, which will take me probably more than one weekend, but you'll get all of that into one video, and then in the next video we will mask off and seal the white line, and then we will put down the blue and show you how to do that, and we will do that using just the paintbrush to show you how that's done. Now, if you're a more experienced modeler and you've got an airbrush, then that would be my recommended way to go. Or if you are use rattle cans frequently and you know how to do that, then by all means follow the instructions given and use the Tamiya rattle can system. But my process will be the same whatever your paint system. So when I'm putting primer down with a brush, you could do that with an airbrush, and when I'm putting white paint down with a brush, you could use a rattle can or an airbrush, and the same when we're doing the blue. So you can choose your method of applying the paint. I'm going to show you with a paintbrush and show you how this can be done and get a good result, and that'll be aimed at beginners. So we will talk a little bit about paintbrush technique in there as well, and try and make this as simple as possible. So the first thing we need to do is mask off the deck. So we've done this lovely deck and we want to protect it from getting any paint. Now, if like me you followed the instructions and didn't make the amendment to the step on the false deck, then you've got deck that actually sits proud at the bow and at the stern of the plastic. So it's up to you. This is preference now, personal preference. If you want to mask that off, I personally would like to paint in the edge so that it looks more in keeping and that it's intended, and that maybe there is some edging to the wooden deck, and I only want the top surface of the wooden deck to be visible. So I'm going to consider that when we're masking. So let's start the process of masking. So we come to mask our desk. We're using the same tape that we talked about earlier in the video for masking off the white. The advantage of this particular tape is it's very low tack. It's specifically designed with modeling in mind. So don't be using like decorators masking tape or something like that. It's too sticky. You'll leave adhesive down, which could damage your model and create problems with you having to clean it up. So this particular yellow low tack tape is exactly what you need, so you need to source some of that. And a little tip from me is when you do use masking tape like that, it is reusable. So as once you've used it once, as long as you've still got the adhesive working, you can use it again. And I quite often use masking tape up to 2 or 3 times, particularly when I've got a big area to cover. It's great for patching up bits and pieces of the area to make sure that you've got coverage. It reuses, so you're recycling 2 or 3 times, which obviously is better for everybody, and it saves you money, because if you use your masking tape just once, it can be quite expensive. So a little tip from me is when we've finished with this masking, keep your tape for future projects. So I will be using some tape that has been used before. You can see it's got paint on. It's been used on a previous project. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by putting down some tape down the middle. Now I would recommend getting as wide a tape as possible for this job. So if it's the first time you've bought masking tape, then you want some tape that is nice and wide. That's going to mean that you can cover the deck quickly. It also means that when you come to do the masking on here, you've got tape that's wide enough to cut to the right width when you come to mask off the white stripe. The other thing you can do is measure the depth of the white stripe on the plan and see if you can find a tape that is the correct depth. So when we come to do the white stripe, we will talk about that. So if you've got a nice wide tape like this, you can see that we will be able to do 3 strips to be able to cover it. And what we're really looking to do is make sure that no paint can get in. So we want to overlap the paint a little bit rather than trying to join the tape together by butting it up like that and trying to make sure we've got it covered. That's when we're likely to get little gaps in the tape that we might not notice. So when you're laying your masking tape, make sure it overlaps so that you've definitely got no little hairline cracks, because there's nothing that's going to look worse than getting some paint on your deck after you've done all that hard work with it. So we want to cover all of this so it overhangs the deck in the first instance, and then we will trim it to shape. So if you've got nice wide tape, you should be able to do that in about 3 lengths. If, like me, you're using narrower tape and patching it up, it will take a little bit longer. So let's start. So the best place to start is actually to start in the middle, because it's nice and easy and we don't have to have any precision. So I'm going to start by covering up the mast hole like that. Make sure you've got it nicely pressed down, especially if you're reusing tape like I'm doing. It just checks that the tape is actually going to adhere properly, and then you're not going to have issues with the tape popping up and things like that. So we want to make sure we're not creating any issues for ourselves. So Give yourself a good margin of overlap to make sure that you've got no potential issues of paint ingress under your tape. Always a risk that paint will, it's like water, it will go, a small amount will go a very long way. So you can see that I've overlapped by a good couple of millimeters there, and that'll make sure that we've got no paint coming in. And then when we get towards the end here, we want to overlap the deck. Now, we're not going to leave it like that. We are going to change that and make sure that we've got it nicely trimmed to where we want to protect from paint. But that's how we're going to start. So overhang the deck. It doesn't matter if you overhang by a good margin. You want to limit your waste a little bit, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we've got enough overhang that we can easily trim it. So you need to be able to have some that you can hold, either with your fingers or with tweezers. So that's what I'm going to do here. And we're just running it down and making sure it's pressed on. So there you go. I'm going to speed up the clip so you can see me doing all of this, but you don't have to hang around and wait for me to do it. So there you go, we've got our tape down, and once you've covered it in tape, just go around and visually check that there's nothing that you've missed, that you've not got any tiny gaps. Check with your fingers that everything is nicely pressed down, especially if you're going to be using an airbrush, because the air from the airbrush can get underneath the masking tape and bring it up. So make sure that if you've got any bits of masking tape that aren't sticking down, that there is no exposed deck underneath it. When you're happy that you've got it nicely covered, we're then at that point where we can trim this ready for painting. So to do that, you're going to need a nice sharp knife. I would recommend a new blade, or if you're an experienced modeler that sharpens blades, then a freshly sharpened blade. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim this tape now so that it covers just the bits that we want to mask off, and we can get the paint in where we want. So as you can see, as we put the tape down, you know, that's overlapping the edges and stuff, and that's going to get in the way of what we need to do. So start either at the bow or at the stern, whichever is your preference. And we need to start trimming. Now I want the tape to be just on the top surface of the deck so that the side profile of any exposed deck gets painted. So I'm going to trim it in that way. If you want to trim yours differently and you want the side profile to be visible, then what you need to do is just go around and push that tape down and then trim against the bottom line where you've got the flat of the plastic. For me, I want to trim so that I've only got the deck covered. So we're going to use the edge of that as our line for cutting. So that should be nice and easy at the bow and at the stern. When we get to the middle here, it gets a little bit more tricky because actually our deck is flush with the top of the hull, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So make sure your blade is nice and sharp, and let's get trimming. So the way to do this is nice and carefully in small sections at a time. I will do my best to explain what we're doing. I'm going to see if we can do it on the cradle, but the model is a little bit slippy on the cradle and doesn't like being pressed on. So we're going to start at the bow, and what you need to do is just press the tape down so that you can easily see the edge that we are cutting from. So you can see here, we can see nice and clearly the edge of the deck, and that's our trimming point. So start by just piercing the tape against that deck edge, and we have to be careful because this knife will easily cut that deck, and we're just going to follow the line of the deck, which is easy because this bit of deck is actually sitting proud of the hull. And then if I just cut through that, there we go, you can see how we can take that away. We can see the side edge of the deck where we want paint to go, but the top is covered. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to very carefully go around and do that. As always with jobs like this, be mindful of where your fingers are in relation to your knife blade. And I'm just going to pierce again a bit further up. And I'm just going to do small sections at a time. And join that trim up. There we go. So that will give us a nice crisp This is why we wanted some tape overhanging, so we can just grab it and peel it away. Okay, now as the deck goes down low with the plastic hull, it gets a little bit more tricky. Now this tape is slightly translucent, and you can see the deck through it. So you're relying on that to give you the ability to see. So where you've got two lots of tape overlapping, it's much more difficult. So you need to start at a place where you can see easily. And actually I've got a little bit of plastic exposed there, which means I've not done a very good job of the masking. So we're gonna put a bit of tape over that, just to make sure there's no deck exposed. Okay, so what we can see is the plastic comes through as like a dark strip, and it actually looks darker than the wooden deck. So we're just gonna follow that, and your knife blade should find the gap between the deck and the plastic, because actually the deck is glued onto your false deck, not onto your plastic. So there is a gap that you can't see, but your knife blade will find, and so you should be able to use that. I hope that explanation is making sense, and just carefully follow your deck edge. You can see that is nice and crisp. So we're flush there, we're not flush there. You can see we've followed the line and it looks nice. So I'm going to carry on doing that. You understand the process now. I'm going to go all the way around. If there's anything comes up I think is worth mentioning, I will. Otherwise, you'll see me when we've completed the process of trimming the masking. So I'll be back in a moment. So it's now time to tackle putting the primer down, and the first thing that you want to do is just make sure that the surface is completely dust free and that you've got a nice clean surface. So give it a wipe down with a damp cloth and let it dry off, or whatever you feel you need to do to make sure that the surface is nice and clean and that you've not got anything that's going to get into the paint. Don't worry too much, because we have the opportunity to clean this layer up before we put more paint down. So then get your chosen primer. Now, I'm not going to mention brands and things like that because it's personal choice. I'm using an acrylic primer here, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to start putting it down. And this is very much about finding the imperfections and dealing with them as you want to. And that, again, is going to be quite a personal thing depending on the modeler. Some people will be very bothered about small imperfections. Other people won't be, and that is fine. It's your model at the end of the day. This is about having a bit of fun and getting a sense of achievement and just building it the way you want to. So don't worry too much about your technique at this stage. We're just getting a coverage down, and what we want to do is make sure that we've covered everything. We don't leave any plastic exposed. Now, the primer is going to do two things. It's going to show up any imperfections, as we've talked about, but it's also going to give us something for the next layers of paint to key to. And we want to try and put it down as smoothly as we can. So you can see I'm going over it several times and evening it out with the brush. Now, an even coverage is not something we need to achieve at this point. What we need to achieve is complete coverage. Because what we're going to do when this is dried, we're going to have a look at it and see if in the light there's any imperfections we need to deal with. So when I say imperfections, I mean scuffs, scratches, or maybe imperfections in the actual hull from its process of being molded. So you can see with a good sized flat brush, we can cover off quite quickly a large surface. Now on the top area where we've masked off, what we want to do is not go in with lots of primer on our brush. So take some of it off and then just go over the top. Make sure that you've got all the plastic covered. You don't want any runs or anything like that, so make sure you take care that you've got a nice even coverage. But if you do get any runs or imperfections, don't worry too much, because we can sand all of those out. Usually primers are fairly quick drying, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this one half of the hull, then I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to do the other side, and that's going to allow me to handle it. There, that looks like we are done. So I'm probably going to leave this about 15 minutes just to dry off. You can see it's already touch dry where we started, but we just need it to be dry because we've got sort of thick and thin patches. The thicker patches will take a bit longer. So when it all looks, depending on your primer, matte or satin, and you've done a little test like that, and you know you can touch it and you're not getting any paint, then it's dry enough for you to handle and do the other side. So I'm going to go and do the other side off camera, and I'll come back to you when we've done our first coat and we're ready to look at what's next. So we're at the point now where we want to put the white down ahead of masking. So have a look at your plans and understand roughly whereabouts down your hull the white line is, and then we're going to paint a broad band that is wider than we need so that we know that if we've not kept it straight, when we come to put our masking on, which will be straight and we'll do that properly, that we've got plenty of wriggle room. So I'm airbrushing this on. If you're using an aerosol paint, as suggested in the instructions, then put a couple of layers down until you've built up the colour and you've got an even finish. So you can see here that I've not got an even finish. This was my first layer of paint, and I'm going to do the second layer in a moment, and you'll see that, and you'll see how that starts to block that in. If you're brush painting, then what you want to do is thin your paint down and paint it thinly, making sure that you've got no brush marks in it. So the thicker your paint, the more likely you are to see brush strokes. But you don't want it too thin because you don't want runs and that sort of stuff. So you need to thin it to a point where you've got a consistency where you can lay the paint down and it will dry without any paint brush strokes. So if you're not sure about that, do a practice on something else and understand what that would look like. Now, because you're putting white down onto grey, particularly if you're brush painting, you will need a number of coats, at least 3, probably somewhere around 4 to 5 coats if you're brush painting. It'll be easier to do it with an enamel paint than an acrylic paint because it dries more slowly, so it levels and you're much more likely to get a nice even finish. I'm using an acrylic white paint for this. This is the Vallejo Model Air white. The brand isn't really relevant. You go with the paint system that you particularly like, but even though this is Model Air, it does need a little bit of thinning in my experience. So we're going to put this down. I'm using a number 4 needle in the airbrush because we're just putting it down fairly broadly. We're not doing anything with precision at this moment in time. So it's always a good idea, if you just press the trigger down, you'll get air only, no paint. You need to pull it back to activate the paint, on this particular brush at least. So it's always a good idea just to give the model a blast and get rid of any dust or hairs off your jumper or anything like that. So I'm just going to blow the area, make sure that's nice and clear, and we'll turn it around and do the other side. And the way to do it is to just hold the trigger down and push forward slightly so that you don't accidentally start any paint. It doesn't matter if you do, really. Okay, so now we've just blown some air over it to get rid of any potential dust. We can start the painting process. So it's a matter of just slowly engaging the paint and seeing how it flows. There we go, so that's gone down quite nicely. You can see that it's starting to even out the look. We might end up doing a 3rd coat, really doesn't matter. So And then what you can do if you want to is you can go over it with just air and dry it off a bit. So that brings us to the end of figure 5. We've done it slightly differently to the instructions, just because I think it's going to be easier to do it that way. Figure 5 has asked us to mask the deck, which we've done, and then it's asking us to mark out and mask off, ready for painting the white line. And what we've done is we've just painted the white down, ready for masking off the white line, which is a slightly different approach. So in the next episode, we will be having a look at figure 6, and in figure 6 they want us to paint the rest of the hull. So what we will be doing is we will be masking off the white stripe and then painting the blue down, which will get us to what they want us to do by the end of figure 6, but with a little bit less masking activity than the instructions are asking us to do. So I will see you next time. Thank you very much for joining. If you've enjoyed this, if it's been useful or helpful, you can hit super thanks below the video. Thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you in the next installment. Until then, you enjoy your modelling. Hi, and thanks for watching. You can support the channel by hitting the like button, and if you haven't subscribed, please consider the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you don't miss any content that I put out. Model Kit Stuff is a self-funded channel, and I don't do membership or Patreon or buy me a coffee. So if you'd like to further donate to the channel and ensure the cameras keep rolling and the content keeps coming, then you can consider making a donation through my PayPal. You'll find a link to that in the text below. You enjoy your modelling, and I'll see you soon.